The Circus and the Nightwhale.
Sure.
Comes out on Friday,
Yes.
3 days away from today. I'm actually going to start at the end. And I found it fascinating the way the album ended. There's so much energy, so much dynamic, and so much electricity, and I mean that literally in terms of guitar. And then White Dove comes, and you're like, I think as a listener, most people would be listening and expecting this big dramatic, and then it settles quiet. How did you decide for that approach?
Well, I thought that it might, be a nice, quiet resolution in taking it back to after you've had all the extravaganzas musically that populate the album. Suddenly, it's just down to the player and fingers and the sounds that you can make yourself without delegating to other people. So I have done that before, sometimes to have an acoustic track or two at the end of something, because I think acoustic music has got its own power. It's not dependent on fashions or technology, and I think the idea of something that's perhaps old school, but hopefully I like to think that the nylon strung guitar can weave its own magic. It certainly does with me. I find myself, even earlier I was watching some stuff with Andres Segovia, and every time I watch it, I marvel at his sound and his dexterity, way long into his dotage. And I've recorded some of that stuff over time, some of the Bach stuff, but I just love electric guitar as well. So I'm half Hendrix and I'm half this and half that, really.
It makes sense at the end, at least into my ears, in terms of the storytelling, the musical storytelling. Yes, the lyrical, but in terms of the musical storytelling, it seems appropriate at the end, and even in terms of song titles and such. Doing a concept album that has not been done for a while, do you find this more of a, like, could you play around with this more cinematically in a musical sense compared to, I guess, any other studio album approach of late?
Well, this one is semi-autobiographical. There's also a third person in there, because some of the things that happen, that obviously have happened to me in the early part of the album, couldn't possibly happen. There's no such thing as whales that swallow whole circuses, but that's for the album cover, and to try and make the album as metaphorical as possible as it progresses. All I can say is that it made sense to me, and it was my wife Jo who wrote quite a lot of the stuff with me, as well as Roger King. So she was the one who suggested the title, and I thought it was a very good, intriguing title. And she's been very much with her finger on the pulse as regards a lot of this. And I must say, writing in a team, I wrote in a team with Genesis, and that was a very competitive team. Whereas I find working within this smaller group, in other words, 3 people, nobody is a yes man with this. So if people think that there's something stronger that I should be saying, they'll tell me so. Roger is certainly like that. And Jo doesn't like me to make the music too casual. She wants it to be full of emotion. She says, I would prefer heavy metal than something that's just, I don't know. I try and be kind here. I don't want to knock anybody, but the adult contemporary schmooze aspect. She doesn't want any of that schmoozing. You know what I mean?
I do. Yes, it does make sense. And that does not come through at all on this album. The thing that actually, it just struck me now, as you're describing that, You mentioned Genesis, of course, and so that I was thinking just before you said that, I'm like, okay, but wait, in terms of the lyrical approach, I'm getting Lamb flashbacks. Rail starts very gritty New York, and then everything happens, and it gets incredibly fantasaical as it progresses. But of course, that was Peter Gabriel writing the lyrics separately versus you and Joe and Roger putting this all together. How much of the lyrical contribution was from the others, or was that all you? How did that split up?
Well, it's myself and Joe lyrically. As regards musically, Roger comes in to do the things that in terms of the arrangements and being able to do the hands-on thing, and coming up with a computer sketch that we add humans to. So all of that was done fairly quickly. Some of it was done on tour because we didn't want to waste time. 2 tracks were recorded a couple of years back, and then there were so many live shows that it was impossible to say we'll finish an album with the paucity of time that we had available. So some of it was live, some of it was from sound checks, and I think it made it all the stronger. The idea that things shouldn't outstay their welcome, so that things happen in cameo or in brief, these little vignettes, which I think hark back to the days of, I'm thinking of 2 bands straight off, Beatles certainly, being able to deliver fabulous character portraits in 2 minutes flat, and I think in terms of Queen, with very short but dynamic solos from Brian May, who I worked with at one point. So it's a different approach to let's let it all hang out and go for it. That thing. It's a much more there's more design to it, I think, racking my brains to think I'm not just going to have a full rant here, but we also want to have romance. So from full rant to full romance. Guitars can scream and cry and rant away, but I think, to have romance as well on the same record, to have that kind of, if I could have a cohesive kind of contradiction within the same record, so you felt, oh, yeah, I've had enough of all of that, now we're moving on to something else. Those contrasts and surprises that I think the Beatles certainly were able to deliver in droves.
Were there any pieces or a piece that was enhanced or came out better because there was the delay, that you didn't have one session to record it all, that you had time to let it all breathe a little bit and come back to it? Is there any that stand out more that, well, I'm glad we did that and waited to record that?
Yeah, funnily enough, one of the tracks, probably the one that I feel most vulnerable about, and I'd expected that I would get most criticism from, because it's very romantic. It's called Ghost, Moon and Living Love. The first part was recorded fairly early on, and then I wondered where to take it, and there were certain things I wanted to get into lyrically and do harmonies. So that starts with a kind of celestial voice, a woman's voice, and it's Amanda Lehman singing on the beginning, and that melody was something that I literally heard in a dream when I was recovering from swamp fever, and I heard this wonderful, beautiful melody with a celestial woman's goddess-like voice, and that was the melody that was sung to me. And I remember being asleep but still being in pain, with the swamp fever stuff I'd got from Louisiana swamps, and it was extraordinary hearing this wonderful melody. And I sang it to Amanda, and we came up with the right key for her, and she sang in a kind of operatic style, and we flooded the voice with effect to make it not quite straight, but make it sound like it was coming to you from another dimension. Plus, the rest of the song, the tail end of the song, which is pretty fragile. There's not much going on, but there's some lovely harmony singing that I think makes it work. And I was listening to this the other day and passed out in the middle of it and woke up at the end, and I couldn't work out what I was hearing. I thought, is that the Beatles or George Harrison or something? And I realized it was the end of this particular track, some of which I'd had a sort of guitar figure that sounded Beatlesque, and I hadn't recorded it. I'd come up with it in about 1969, and I thought, I'm going back a long way here, but I think this is the right place for it. We can do this, and we can make it work. I was able to develop it a bit more now. So the other bricks fell into place with this very slow build on this particular song, but so far, no one has given me a hard time for doing a love song. No, none of the proggers yet. Maybe they will, but there we go.
Okay. Well, to me, it sounds good. Hopefully, the proggers agree when they do hear it. What is the most autobiographical part of the album, and how much can you split? I mean, I don't know that you need to do a precise percentage, but how much is Traveler and how much is you?
Yeah, well, I think the second half becomes more, once you've got the last 4 tracks, I think of it as more metaphorical. All at sea is a state of mind, but we do it as a kind of audio seascape. Into the Nightwhale, again, one's got cartoons in mind, and all of those stories, from Homer to the biblical stuff to Pinocchio, Collodi, all of that. Wherever you are is a kind of the next track is more kind of. How do I describe it? Let's see. It's a cross between a rock song and a love song, but there's also the spiritual aspect to it. In other words, can love survive? Those big questions that we keep asking ourselves as the older we get. And then White Dove, which is a resolution at the end of the album. So I'd say that it becomes progressively more Traveler and less me as it continues, whereas I think the early stuff is talking about my need for autonomy, or my thrill, in fact, at initially joining Genesis around about track number 5. Enter the Ring is Joys of Genesis. Track number 6, Get Me Out, is the need to leave, that need for autonomy and freedom. So that gives you some of the idea of it, and then other songs refer to the establishment of myself and Joe as a couple over a slow, long period of time, a very long courtship, which started out as work and ended up as something else entirely between us. But I like to think it's got these dramatic moments on the album. It's lovely to be working with, there's 3 drummers and 1 virtual drummer. We got Nick DeVigilio kicking off the first track on People of the Smoke, Craig Blundell on the majority of songs, but I also got to reconnect with Hugo Dagenhart on Breakout, where I played guitar on it. We just had a rough sketch, and I played bass on it because there was no bass player available. And then he put drums on it, and a little bit of keyboard from Ben Fenner. That's an instrumental. And wonderful to get these extraordinary drum performances out of people. So I think the drumming on this album is quite extraordinary. A lot of drumming dexterity going on.
Yeah, it strikes me as visceral. My The thing that kept coming through my mind was actually Calling All Stations of all albums, and I was getting a similar vibe of
Really?
that. Yes, and maybe in part
Wow.
because Nick DiVirgilio's on it. I know just a little bit compared to Calling All Stations, where he's on obviously a lot more. But I was thinking, so this is what that album could have sounded like if Steve Hackett were part of that album. I mean, it's a stretch, but it was
Yes.
floating through my mind.
It's funny that, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, I remember having this conversation with Tony Banks, who was saying to me that Calling All Stations sold a mere 1.3 million, which for them they considered to be a failure. But I think for other people, you might think that to have in excess of 1 million sales was something that was a very great success. It depends on your motivation. If you're making music in order to be competitive, I understand why you would feel that, okay, well, maybe that hadn't quite done it. But then, you've got lovely vocals from, I was going to say various people on the album, but, from Ray. And that was, really good. I think it's very difficult for him. But he's going to join us in London when we do the Royal Albert Hall and get to sing with us on one or two things, as well as Nad Sylvan. So, yeah, Ray Wilson. That'll be interesting. But I don't do albums in order to sell masses of quantities. You know what I mean? I'm more interested in quality than quantity. So I'm still the idealist. I'm ever the idealist. If I can make an album that I'm proud of, I'd rather have that than here's me, Hackett, going out and playing the hits. I have to be aware of that. I don't play my hit singles. I don't do that. The hits, that one with Genesis, one on my own, one with GTR. I usually don't do that. Occasionally I will. Okay, I'll concede, but I'm an albums animal. I love what albums did for the world. It brought the world together. The moment the Beatles started using Indian musicians, suddenly there was no more world music. Everything was mainstream immediately, and that's what you can do when you're in that vaunted position, of course. So we had extraordinary respect. Genesis were huge Beatle fans, and John Lennon said nice things about Genesis. He said he thought that Genesis were true sons of the Beatles. So I've tried to live up to that with this